So this one command takes a topic and hands you back a fully researched, written, and edited article. 3 AI agents did the whole thing start to finish, and I want to show you exactly how to build it. Now, most tutorials would have you reach for CrewAI or LangChain or ADK for something like this, but we're not going to be doing that. We're building the whole multi-agent pattern from scratch, plain Python classes, and then we're going to use the Anthropic SDK to call Claude directly, but you can use any AI agent you want. There's nothing hidden behind a framework here, because once you've built it yourself, you actually understand what an AI agent is, and then you can pick up any framework you want or skip them completely, which seems to be a common pattern nowadays. Here's the idea. A single LLM call is like asking one person to research, write, and edit all at once. It works, but the quality suffers, so we'll split the work across 3 specialized agents, like a small newsroom. Firstly, a researcher will dig through sources and gather facts. Then a writer will turn that research into a draft. And then finally, an editor will polish and save the final file. Each one gets its own system prompt, its own tools, and exactly one job. So they pass the work straight down the line. By the end, you'll have this running locally. A topic goes in and a polished markdown article comes out. And all the code is linked in the description below. And if you like what we did here locally, drop a comment so I can teach you how to deploy it next. All right, let's build it. So I put together a full guide with all the commands and the included code for you to get started and follow along if you'd like. Of course, I'm not going to be copying and pasting every command and showing you every single line, but I will gloss over the general terms to give you a good idea of what's going on. So without further ado, let's get started. Our goal here is to be able to run one function, Python main.py, and then feed in some sentence for it to be able to run all of the agents and then give us a response. This process will happen locally, so we'll be building all of our agents and running them locally within our computer, but ideally when you're working in production and you want to serve up this solution to your clients or your customers, you want to be able to put it into production somewhere on the cloud. So if you want to see that in the next episode, just drop a comment below and I'll build a little guide on how to do that as well. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our project. So we're going to create a virtual environment here. I called mine MAS, multi-agent system, and then you just activate it. And this way that all of your packages that you're working within will just stay contained within that virtual environment. So if you take a look here, I just have cursor open and my entire folder structure that includes all of the files. I went through the tutorial already and included all of the files here so we can go through them pretty quickly. And then I went ahead and initialized my virtual environment. Inside of your virtual environment, once you activate it with this command here, you can install all the dependencies that we're going to be using within this guide. The next thing you want to do is create a requirements.txt file. This is really good practice so that when you push this up to some kind of Docker container or put it into production and or have it within your team to work on as well, they can have it running locally perfectly fine or running within a container, obviously. You'll then punch in your API key here once you create your .env file, and then here's where the magic starts to happen. Create your configuration.py file, config.py. It's really nice. It gives us the ability to have the configuration environment variables be pulled into other files really easily by just importing config. So we'll actually see that here inside of agent.py from config, import Anthropic API key and model. And if you take a look at the config.py file, we actually define those variables here. Now, I have a lot of questions anytime I run any of these builds. People always ask me, why can't I just get an AI agent, a coding AI agent to just build this entire thing for me? And you absolutely can. There's no problem with that. And that's probably what you should be doing at some point. But understanding the fundamental code and how it works and how these agents are built to begin with will give you a lot of insight on how you will inform your AI agent, your coding AI agent, on how to build it in the future. So the next thing we'll do here is run this command, which will create the skeleton for us and go through the rest of this setup process. So you can mark this as complete once you go through it, but the first most important piece that we're going to be doing is building our first agent class. Now, if you're familiar with working with any agent framework like ADK, CrewAI, LangGraph, or what have you, they come with their own agent classes. But because we're not using any of those frameworks for illustrative and educational purposes, we have to build our own. And all an agent class gives us the capability of doing is wraps our LLM around with some tooling in order to manage the turns. You'll actually see the 2 most important things here is end turn and tool use. Anytime the LLM responds with those 2 things, we know that we have to do something, either end the turn for that LLM or call some specific tools. And that's what brings us to our next step here. So feel free to go through this if you want to learn a little bit more about how the agent class is built. But we can test the agent here by copying this, creating a new file, test agent.py, and then we'll paste in this code. And we'll run Python test agents.py, run this, and you'll see the test agent running and spinning up and working perfectly. So you'll see here a result, blah, blah, blah. It's just a simple prompt. The next thing we'll do is add tools. Tools are very simple. They just give the LLM the capability to execute on certain things. And by executing on certain things, I just mean doing anything that is not generating text. So an LLM, the brain of any AI agent by default, is just a text generation machine. It just predicts the next word in the sequence at any point in time. However, that doesn't mean that it's able to actually go out onto the web and search for data, or be able to create a new document or save that document to Google Drive or whatever. If you want to give it any of those capabilities, you have to create what we call tools and then give the LLM the capability of running those tools. The first thing we're going to do is create this file tools, which would have been scaffolded for you already when you ran that command, and then paste in this web search tool here. A tool is really just a function, and then you give the AI agent the function as a tool so it knows that it needs to call it as a tool. And then this is a kind of definition. It's a schema that tells Claude or our LLM what kind of tool to expect and what the description of that tool is. This is very important because anytime you give an LLM any tool, it should know about the existence and the capabilities of that tool via natural language. And LLM, all it is natural language. So we create this schema that describes it in natural language. The next thing we're going to do is create another tool called save to file, which is very straightforward. And just like that, you've created two tools inside a tools.py file. And then you can run this simple file similar to how we did for the agent class to test it and make sure it works. So next, we'll jump into the fun part where we start building our agents. First one is the researcher agent. So we're going to come into the agents.py file and copy and paste this code into here. We create researcher. This is our first agent. And you can see here, actually, the most complex portion or the thing that is the largest for any agent is the prompt. All right, so this is a system prompt, and this gives the AI agent its personality, and it tells it exactly what it needs to do. This is the most important part of any AI agent development, is just writing that prompt, that system instruction, and making sure it's really good and does exactly what it's supposed to. The next most important part is the web search tool. So you give the tool here and then the functionality, right? So web search tool, and this is what we imported. Remember, if we jump back into tools, that is defined right here. So web search and web search tool. So we give it both of those. In an AI agent framework like CrewAI or LangGraph or ADK, you would just define this with one function, and then you would give it a tool directive on top of it that it will inherit. And then you can punch that in, and then the description and everything for that inheritance will come along for the ride. And so that way you don't have to pass in both the function and the schema, you just pass in the one thing. But we're building this from scratch, so it's a little bit more complicated. If you do lean towards using an agent framework, it's a little bit more easy, but at least this way we can see exactly what it's doing. Great. The next thing that we want to do is actually test the researcher. So test researcher, and we'll let that run while we go ahead and strap up the rest of the stuff. So this is going to run, and because it's searching the web, it can take some time. So we'll leave that to run in the meantime. The next thing here is the writer. The writer's job is just to take all of the information that the researcher created and then write some specific structure to it. So that one's very straightforward, and you can actually see here in agents.py, I have it already. Copy and paste that in right underneath, and this one's much simpler than the one above because it doesn't include any tools. It just takes text and generates text, which is something we're familiar with if you've ever used AI agents in the past. And so you can actually see here that there is a little bit of an explanation as to how we can pass data from one AI agent to the next. I'll let you go through this if you're interested, but for the most part, it's just taking the data that comes out of one AI agent and passing it as input into the next one. Finally, we'll get into the editor, which is the final AI agent in the flow, which also saves the research to a file in markdown. So you can see here, that's why we provide the tool save to file, which we created previously, but it's the exact same pattern, create editor. And you're starting to see kind of a common pattern here. It's really easy as soon as you build one AI agent, literally just copy and paste the rest of them, save to file tool, and then you give the tool functions. And while that happened, our research finished. And this is actually the longest portion of the flow, is actually the research, going out to the web and collecting everything, scouring different sources. The easiest portions of the flow is taking it, sending it to the writer, and then taking that output and then sending it to the editor. The editor's main job is to actually save it to file. Finally, we can go ahead and run the pipeline, which is the main, the fun part. So we create a main.py file, which is right here. And all it does is it says, you can see here, the notes gets saved into whatever the researcher runs. We take that and we pass it into the writer, and then we take that, the draft, and then pass it into the editor, right? So we stitch this up. Now, in any agent framework that you use, you can actually have a class that'll define the data flow from start to finish. Here, it's a little bit redundant, and obviously it doesn't provide us with too much flexibility because you can pass one to the next. But in an agent framework, you would have a lot more flexibility. So we'll go ahead and run this. paste this in. We're gonna say, I wanna research the rise of multi-agent AI systems. So while that runs, I'll go over the next piece here. So you'll see the researcher at work, the writer finishes, and you can see this inside our fact trace. Now, again, agent frameworks have a lot of this logging built in for you. But while that runs, we can check the output inside of the whatever.md file. And then you can actually see here, if we're using CrewAI, the difference between using CrewAI versus what we just built is it's very easy to do something like this just by stitching it together here and then saying that the process that I want to sequentially. So if you'd like to, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do next that you can continue to add on to this. You can add more agents to the system afterwards. You can put in a human in the loop. A lot of people, what they've been doing is having like an email human in the loop. So the multi-agent system will kick off an email and then wait and then like reinstantiate its memory when the user responds via email. It takes a little bit more orchestration and production know-how, but it is possible. And then I know a lot of people always ask me about the token usage. You can build out a little function that'll track the tokens for you. And there's a lot of different cool things that you can do, because at the end of the day, they're just agents. So anything that's possible with agents, you can build into your system. So finally, let's take a look at the logs to see how our multi-agent system is running. You can see here that the longest portion of the job is finished. The researcher is using all of his tools. It came back complete. The writer is now writing. Here's what is super important to also observe. You can see here, anytime the AI agents are using a tool, it logs that, and finally it's complete. So you can jump into the output here. You'll see that markdown is generated and the entire report is here. So hopefully this unlocked a little bit of insight for you on how to build multi-agent systems. So that's it. The whole system, 3 agents, each with one job. The researcher gathers the sources, the writer drafts the article, the editor polishes and saves the file. Now, this may be a little bit of an overkill for just one task, but you could take this idea and move it into anything else. The reason this beats one giant prompt is focus. Each agent gets one role, one system prompt, one set of tools. So no single model is trying to do the research, write, and edit at the same time. And because you built every single piece yourself, every piece is yours to change. And so this is just a starting point, not a finished product. From here, you can swap the search tool for something stronger if you want, add a fact-checking pass to the editor, use an LLM as a judge, chain it against a 4th agent, whatever you want. Or you can just point the writer at your own style guide so the draft sounds just like you. The pattern scales however you need it to. And if you do reach for CrewAI or LangGraph or ADK later, they'll finally make a little bit more sense, because now you know exactly what they're abstracting away. And so that's it. All the code and the prompts are in the description below. You can clone it and drop your API key in, and then you can run it. But a quick question for you in the comments. What's the first thing you'd put a crew of AI agents to work on? If this was useful, hit subscribe, because more builds like this are coming soon. See you in the next one.